Ukraine says a Russian rocket attack on a civilian-filled railway station in Kramatorsk killed at least 40 people and wounded at least 100. Russia has denied this attack. The ongoing war has far-reaching impacts across the world, from rising energy prices to issues in the global food supply. We're all a witness to the consequences. Welcome to WION World as One. My name is Priyanka Sharma, and on this special broadcast of the WION-VOA Co-Production, we'll tell you more about where this war is headed, and we'll also look at the COVID variant, which is now dominant in the United States. So let's get started. Now, the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken said on Thursday that new weapons are being delivered to Ukrainian forces with a strong sense of urgency following a two-day meeting of NATO and G7 foreign ministers in Brussels. As Henry Ridgwell reports, Ukraine's foreign minister told NATO that the coming battles against invading Russian forces will resemble World War II. Take a look.
Visiting NATO, Ukraine's foreign minister said his message could be summarized in 3 words: weapons, weapons and weapons.
Either you help us now, and I'm speaking about days, not weeks, or your help will come too late. And many people will die.
Kuleba warned that Russian forces are regrouping to focus on the eastern Donbas region.
The battle for Donbas will remind you of the Second World War, with large operations, maneuvers, involvement of thousands of tanks, armored vehicles, planes, artillery.
Was that enough to persuade NATO and G7 ministers? The US Secretary of State said more weapons were on their way to Ukraine.
We are looking at, day in, day out, what we believe they most need, to include new systems that have not heretofore been provided. We're listening to them in terms of their assessment of what they need. We're putting that all together, and we're proceeding. And we have a strong sense of urgency. That was something that I think was felt among all allies and partners here today.
Blinken also condemned the apparent civilian massacres carried out by Russian forces in towns like Bucha, which Moscow has denied despite mounting evidence.
For every Bucha, there are many more towns Russia has occupied and more towns it is still occupying, places where we must assume Russian soldiers are committing more atrocities right now.
The West's appetite to supply a greater quantity and range of weapons to Ukraine is growing, says analyst Malcolm Chalmers.
Because of the atrocities that we're seeing in our TV screens, and not least because the Ukrainians are actually winning in important respects. They've won the battle in the north and they're getting ready for a fight in the east. So people really do believe the Ukrainians have a chance of achieving most of their objectives. NATO countries will want a Russian military that is seen to be weakened.
In the east, Russia controls more territory, and Ukraine will require additional types of weapons, says Chalmers.
Particularly ones which can reach deeper behind Russian lines to hold at risk, for example, Russian longer-range artillery, which anti-tank weapons cannot do at range, and also to have effective air defences.
For Ukraine, the immediate priority is getting heavy weapons to the eastern front lines as its forces prepare for the next Russian offensive. Henry Ridgwell for VOA News, London.
Joining us now with more analysis is VOA correspondent Jessica Stone. Jessica, welcome to this special broadcast. My first question to you: Russia's invasion of Ukraine has sparked fears in the Indo-Pacific region in particular of similar moves by China against Taiwan and other sovereign states. We've also seen Australia speed up the timetable to buy long-range strike missiles because of growing threats from Russia and China. So what's the reaction in Washington as of now?
Well, there's a lot of concern here in Washington. This all came down after the announcement of a Solomon Islands draft security pact with China, which allows Beijing to base some of its troops, some of its warships in the Solomon Islands. And the U.S. is very concerned that that could affect international trade, that it could also block efforts by the United States to help Australia or New Zealand in the event of a Pacific conflict. So yes, you have seen Australia really ramp up its defense, and that includes hypersonic weapons. We saw the US, UK, and Australia this week announce that they will add hypersonic weapons to the AUKUS deal, which was announced earlier this year. And in addition, Canberra is going to spend $2.6 billion to fast track the purchase of long-range missiles to arm its warships and its fighter jets. That's going to fast track that process by about 3 years. Now, meantime, I think it also bears mentioning that yesterday here in New York, we did have that UN UN General Assembly vote on whether or not Russia should remain part of the Council on Human Rights. It was overwhelmingly suspended. Also worth noting that Nepal, India, and Pakistan all abstained from that vote. Nonetheless, that is going forward. And there will be other repercussions we can only assume coming out of the United Nations.
Jessica, we also know that Russia and Ukraine are big sources of wheat for the world, in fact. So if this war does last for a long time from now, what can we expect in terms of its impact on the global food supply chain?
Well, you're probably already seeing it on your food shelves there in India and New Delhi in particular. You know, Ukraine and Russia account for about a third of global wheat supply, a tremendous impact there. And in addition, Russia and Belarus, which is also impacted by this conflict, provide a lot of the ingredients that go into fertilizer. So here in the United States, we've seen fertilizer prices go up by about 43%. And earlier this week, we heard U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen saying that American farmers face what she called, quote, astronomical costs. Indonesia and Bangladesh are expected to be among the countries most impacted by these price hikes. And some of these countries are limiting exports of wheat. For example, Indonesia is doing that. The UN Secretary General, though, warning this week that countries should not try to do that because it will impact global trade. And they're also looking for other sources of wheat in Australia, in Canada, and in Argentina.
Right, Jessica, thanks for those insights. Stay with us on this special broadcast. We'll come back to you for your inputs on another story. Now let's move on and shift our focus to the pandemic. Surges of the COVID-19 Omicron variant called BA2 have put countries around the world on high alert. It's now the dominant variant in the United States, where a fourth booster shot has now been approved for people older than 50. VOA's Laurel Bowman has the entire details. Take a look.
Since March, China has been battling its biggest COVID-19 wave yet, with cases peaking in Shanghai. The government locked down the city of more than 24 million people and is requiring mass testing. Public transportation is now halted, and the once busy streets are largely empty. In the United Kingdom, lines are long at airports and flights are grounded by flight staff sicknesses. England has seen a new surge of COVID-19 in recent weeks, with infection rates at their highest since the pandemic began. First detected in January, BA2, which is a sublineage of Omicron, is now the main cause of COVID-19 cases globally, and it's the dominant strain in the United States, accounting for 72% of variants circulating in the country, according to U.S. health authorities.
There is no evidence that BA2 results in more severe disease compared with the BA1 variant, nor does it appear to be more likely to evade immune protection than BA1. But BA2 does appear to be more transmissible than BA1.
The U.S. government is putting a focus on long COVID, with the Department of Health and Human Services leading efforts to improve care for people with the condition, offer education about it, and advance research.
Long COVID is real, and there is still so much we don't know about it. Millions of Americans may be struggling with lingering health effects, ranging from things that are easier to notice, like trouble breathing or irregular heartbeats, to less apparent but potentially serious conditions related to the brain or mental health.
Meanwhile, U.S. President Joe Biden received his second booster shot, urging Americans over 50 who've just been cleared to do so to get one too. Laurel Bowman, VOA News, Washington.
We still have Voice of America's correspondent Jessica Stone with us on this broadcast from Washington. Jessica, thanks for staying on. China's lockdown has really taken its toll on its major ports, causing trade disruptions for countries around the world. Any signs of all this easing as of now?
Yeah. Well, not yet, because I think we're really on the upswing with the virus continuing to take over parts of China. And in particular, we're noticing this from the major shipping magnate, Maersk, who's saying that, look, our trucks can't get in and out of these ports. We're seeing a reduction, they said, of about 30% in trucking. So trucking is really the big impact because they can't get in and out of these ports. We know that Shenzhen also reported a 32% cut in its ocean shipments. And we're also hearing reports of other Chinese cities turning away trucks that come from Shanghai or Shenzhen because they are coming from those locations and they've been shut down. Concerns over the virus impacting that decision-making process. So I think it's safe to say we can expect delays in any kind of product that comes from China, that has parts from China, that's manufactured in China. We're also likely to see an increase in costs. And if I could just add, you saw President Biden there getting his booster shot. There are already concerns here in Washington that he has been exposed to COVID-19 because we just got a report that the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, has tested positive for COVID-19, and she was just behind him in a bill signing earlier this week. So we are seeing a little bit of an increase, an uptick in cases on Capitol Hill. Now, most of them have gone home for the 2-week break here, so they also may be concerned about spreading it to their districts, but we'll have to see if President Biden continues to stay negative.
Right. Jessica, let's talk about how the coronavirus has changed our lives. It truly has changed the way we live and work. Are we seeing the death of the commute there in the United States as of now?
Yeah. Well, I am not commuting right now. I don't know if you are. You may be going into the studio, but a lot of Americans still are not. And it's not just a preference, it's also a reality. The security company Castle, which makes those security cards that people swipe in and out when they go in and out of work, they did a study in Manhattan where we're really focusing on the impact there that said 40% of Manhattan office space is not occupied. That is a tremendous blow to the economy in New York City, our biggest city for commerce. And it's important to watch occupancy, particularly in Midtown Manhattan, where 1.6 million Americans work. They account for about 2/3 of the city's GDP. And those workers were working and supporting businesses and all kinds of mass transportation before the pandemic. They haven't yet returned. And one of the solutions that New York City has done before is they've turned these commercial buildings into housing. They did that after September 11th. They did that in downtown Manhattan. But it appears that they cannot do it as easily in uptown Manhattan because these are larger buildings. It's much more difficult to get the codes to change. We are seeing some other trends change, including cryptocurrency companies coming into Midtown Manhattan. It's something that all of New York City is monitoring heavily, expecting more flexible workspace as well as shorter lease times, just to make sure that they can accommodate new kinds of operations, new kinds of companies coming into Midtown Manhattan. It's a huge economic blow to our economy here in the United States if we can't get that moving again.
Absolutely. And Jessica Stone, on that note, thank you so much for joining us on this broadcast on WION World is One. Thanks for all your insights. WION World is One is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news updates on the move.